Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully this microphone is working. I don't know if they can hear me back there. Can you hear me? Hello, everybody. I can have your attention. Yeah. We'll have plenty to talk about in a moment. Thank you all for coming here today. Thank you to Rowdy Hall, Christy, Mark, the whole crew here for hosting us. My name is Gavin Manu. I'm the co-publisher of the Express News Group, along with my wife, Catherine. And that's a new company, only a couple months old. We're the East Hampton Press, the Southampton Press, as well as the Sag Harbor Express. I hope everybody is enjoying their lunch, and we're going to introduce our panelists in a moment. I just wanted to mention a few people from our team who are here today. We have Bill Sutton, our managing editor, Virginia Garrison, who's the editor of the East Hampton Press, Michael Wright, our reporter, who will be covering today's session, Michael Heller, our photographer, is here today, Ellen Dioguardi, our event director, who's at the front door, and Joseph Shaw to my left, who is our executive editor, who will be moderating today's event. Thank you all for coming. These series, which we started in Sag Harbor, are meant to ignite conversation, engage the community, talk about issues that are important to all of us in sort of a different way than our traditional print or digital media. So we've had a lot of success in just starting conversations. That's the best we can hope to do. We bring experts on the topics together and hopefully get a lot of input from the people who attend as well. So that's a really important relationship that we're trying to develop. I want to thank a couple of our sponsors who are here today. Rocco Carrero, I met with him a couple weeks ago out in his office on County Road 39, and he was so excited about about the topics that we were bringing out, that they mattered, that they meant something, and he was instantly engaged in what we were doing. He's sponsoring our events in Southampton as well, which we've been holding at Union Cantina. Rocco's got some books up on the front on the bar. He's here with us today. Rocco, thank you so much for everything. Also, thank you to the Adam Miller Group. I'm not sure if Adam was able to make it here, but they've been a big supporter of ours in Sag Harbor and Southampton and also now in East Hampton. So thank you to the Adam Miller Group. Advantage Title has also been a tremendous friend of ours. Chris Nuzzi, who's here today. Where are you, Chris? There you are. Class of 92, I believe. Class of 93, East Hampton High School. So Chris and I go way back, and he's very community-minded, and again, they've been a big supporter of ours for everything that we've been doing, so thank you to them. If there's any other local business owners in this room who want to be part of what we're doing, I encourage you to talk to me, talk to Ellen. It's something that you're going to be proud of if you join up with us on these things. We're doing them, like I said, in Southampton, East Hampton, and Sag Harbor. There's so many changes that we're always facing: development, affordable housing, water quality, the list goes on and on. I know a lot of people in this room are super involved in what we're doing, but as a news organization, we're able to spread the word to a larger audience. So talk to us about it, engage with this, and let's keep the conversations going. So with that, I'm going to introduce Joe Shaw, our executive editor. Joe?
I will disappear behind this, so I'm just going to move it. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. Welcome to the second press session ever and our first press session in East Hampton. So we're really excited about that. It is the first of many to come in East Hampton. Gavin said press sessions are meant to be a dynamic conversation. They're also meant to be substantive. But it's important to make the point right up front. This is a conversation. We want everybody here involved. It's not just a panel discussion. We want the audience asking questions and offering insights. The one thing we ask everybody, and that's panelists and audience members alike, is please keep your questions and answers as brief as you can so we can get as many voices as we can into the conversation. The audience, what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce the panel and everybody has one question to answer. We're going to go down the line and do that first and then immediately come to the audience for questions. So if you can just wait till we do that, and if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll come to you with the microphone. Virginia Garrison, our East Hampton press editor, is going to be sort of working the back of the room, and we'll tag team with the microphone as we need to. And I'm basically going to be a traffic cop for the panel and the audience. I'm going to let you talk. I will subtly interrupt you if you're starting to go a little long. I'm trying not to be rude, and I'm pretty good at that. I don't think I'll be rude. I'm going to let people finish their thoughts, but I ask everybody to just remember we have a lot to get through today. So then we will go immediately to the audience questions after. So let's start by introducing the panel and letting them answer a question. We provided each of these questions to the individual panelists in advance so they'd have some time to prepare their initial answer. So we're going to go left to right. We will start with Jennifer Garvey, who is the Long Island Development Manager for Orsted U.S. Offshore Wind, which is the company that is building the South Fork Wind Farm. Jen, can you give us a brief update on the status of the South Fork Wind Farm in terms of the review process, the timeline, and what the expected output of the wind farm is at this point?
Sure. Yep.
Oh, actually, I think you have. Let's try the wireless. You just speak. I don't think you have to do anything. You just talk.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Barely.
Barely.
Yeah.
It's your hockey.
Okay. Let me see if I can just get a little closer. Is that better? Better. No?
How about you do
Sure,
this?
Use the microphone.
Okay.
You can use it.
Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. Well, first, thanks so much for having me. This is great and terrific to see. What a packed event. This is quite a turnout. So thanks everybody for coming out. I'm glad you're so interested in this topic. I will say I did an expressions panel a couple of years ago. So we're talking here 2 years later. We're still talking about this. So exciting times for sure. But thanks so much for having me. My name, as was mentioned, I'm Jennifer Garvey. I'm the Long Island Development Manager for Orsted. And so quick update on the South Fork Wind Farm, in terms of project scope, output, all of that. The South Fork Wind Farm is a 15 turbine installation, maximum output of 132 megawatts. It will be located 35 miles from Montauk Point, so way out there. And the power from that installation will be delivered back to shore via a single submarine cable. It's a 138 kV line. There's been a little bit of lore about the size and scope of the cable and the size of the project, but that's where it stands. And the power from the wind farm will be delivered to the substation located obviously it's in East Hampton. It's called the East Hampton Substation. It's off of Cove Hollow Road. And just to be clear, this is a standalone wind farm. It's separate from, obviously, you may have heard about other wind farms that are happening. We have a recent award in the Sunrise Wind Farm that was announced in July. It's a completely separate installation, just 15 turbines, separate transmission cable, and the two are not commingled at all. So that's the latest on the scope and size of it. In terms of the permitting phase, which is the phase that we're currently in for this project, obviously we've been out in the community for about 2 years now since we received our power purchase agreement from LIPA back in really the beginning of 2017. And we now have our two major applications are filed. We have a federal application and a state application. So the state application, it's a process called Article 7, which is reviewed by the Public Service Commission. And that is an application that was filed back in September of 2018. So it's been with the commission for over a year now. We also have a federal application, which is called the Construction and Operations Plan, which was submitted to BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. I'll just warn you, there are a lot of acronyms in this business. But that application was submitted in June of last year. So obviously we're well into the permitting phase at this point. We've on the state side, we've been through our public statement hearing, which occurred in June. The application's been deemed complete, and just this past week, we actually noticed our intention to commence settlement negotiations, which is the next step in the process. And so that's a new notice that's out there, and I believe the date for that the first opportunity for the parties who are the individuals or parties who are a party to the case happens on October 8th. And then on the federal side, we have obviously our application's been in for some time there as well. The next output will be a draft environmental impact statement. We did request a pause in our application a few months ago when we were collecting some more data to be responsive to some feedback from the fishing community about turbine spacing. And so that information has been supplied, and we are currently reviewing with BOEM sort of the schedule for next steps for that particular, the next output, which as I mentioned, is the draft environmental impact statement. So, and generally, the steps after that. So,
Can I ask you
Yes.
two very quick follow-up questions? One is the overall timeline. Can you just very briefly tell us how that stands at the moment? And second of all, you said 132 megawatts right now is the output. Can you put that into some type of context for us for how many homes that would serve?
yes, absolutely. I know we don't all speak megawatts. It's 70,000 homes, so power for 70,000 typical homes every year. So it's a lot of clean power. And what was the other question?
The overall timeline.
Oh, timeline, yes. So this is a project that's due to come online at the end of 2022.
You're still online.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Jen. Fred, I don't think you're going to need the microphone. It's just my thought here. So, Mr. Thiele, although you've been a longtime supporter of using wind power to meet Long Island's power needs, you withdrew your support for the South Fork Wind Farm, at least for a time, earlier this year. You said that you'd lost trust in the developers because of what you called bait and switch tactics, a change in ownership, as well as an expansion of the wind farm's ability to generate power. Orsted subsequently apologized. Do you now feel that you can trust this in potential future offshore developers? And if not, what would it take to completely earn your trust?
So I'm going to do something I don't do very often anymore, and that is I'm going to quote Ronald Reagan, which is trust but verify. And that's the way that I feel about this. I mean, the state of New York, myself, we are promoting through the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which the legislature passed this year. Climate leadership and community protection. And that has within it goals, legally enforceable goals for reducing greenhouse gases, for obtaining offshore wind and offshore energy. And I believe in those goals. I co-sponsored that legislation and I support it. So that's number one. Climate change isn't coming. Climate change is here. And renewable energy needs to be a part of that. But the act is climate leadership, which I believe New York State is providing, but also community protection. And I don't think it's any secret. And if it was, it's not a secret after you read your question, that I've had questions and I've had problems as far as transparency and as far as the response to the community with regard to Deepwater and then with regard to Orsted. Nonetheless, we need to move forward with this project, and we continue to work together. We continue to have discussions. We continue to exchange information. I view my role differently than what Orsted's role is. They are a major corporation proposing to put major industrial infrastructure in my assembly district. And that infrastructure, while it is providing for a good goal, also has major impacts. So it's not just climate leadership, it's community protection. I don't view myself, when it comes to specific projects, as being a cheerleader. I need to be the umpire. I need to be able to make sure that on the community protection part, that the communities that I represent, there's a lot of water-based infrastructure, but also land-based infrastructure, transmission lines, substations, in addition to the turbines. We need to, as a community, while supporting renewable energy, also identify all of the impacts that come with that, fully identify those impacts, and then make sure that we do everything that we can to either mitigate or avoid those impacts for our local community.
Fred? Bonnie, you are here representing, yes, I was about to timber that right on my head there, sorry. Bonnie, you're here representing the commercial fishing community. You've been advocating against, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not reading. Bonnie Brady is the executive director of the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association and a candidate for the town board. Did I not introduce Fred Thiele as state assemblyman? That's my apologies if I didn't do that. I think everybody knows that. But Bonnie is here representing the commercial fishing industry. Bonnie, you've been advocating against the industrialization of the oceans with the construction of offshore wind farms because of questions about the effects that they will have on fish and marine mammal migrations and the safety and compatibility of wind farms and with the commercial fishing industry. Can you envision a way forward that could answer those questions satisfactorily and allow the design of wind farms that would not be of logistical or safety concerns to fishermen?
Can everyone hear me? Is this good? Can you hear me? No? Yes? Okay, there I am. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I drove from Gloucester this morning, so if I look a little shattered, that's why. Regarding the question... switch mics? Sorry.
I'll take that one.
Regarding the question, that's better. As to, I think, moving forward, I think in order to move forward, we need to look backward. And by that, I mean to Rhode Island. They created something called the Ocean SAMP, which was a specialized area management plan. And within that plan, they also created a fisheries advisory board that also included language in the plan. They chose an area, they looked at it biologically, scientifically, by birds, by fishing impact, etc. And they included some very important language in their Coastal Resource Management Council legislative language. And if you don't mind for a second, I'll read the most important part, and anyone that wants to get it afterwards, I'll be glad to give it to them. Negotiation of mitigation agreements shall be mitigation measures may include, but are not limited to, compensation, effort reduction, habitat preservation, restoration, and construction, marketing, and infrastructure improvements. Where there are potential impacts associated with proposed projects, the need for mitigation shall be presumed. Negotiation of mitigation agreements shall be a necessary condition of any approval or permit of a project by the council. Mitigation shall be negotiated between the council staff, the Fisheries Advisory Board, the project developer, and approved by the council. That's the Coastal Resource Management Council, which does the Coastal Zone Management Act for the state of Rhode Island. The reasonable costs associated with negotiation, which may include data collection and analysis, technical and financial analysis, and legal costs, shall be borne by the applicant. The applicant shall establish and maintain either an escrow account to cover said costs of this negotiation or such other mechanism as set forth in the permit or approval condition pertaining to mitigation. This policy shall apply to all large-scale offshore developments, underwater cables, and other projects as determined by the council. So the reason that Rhode Island had a say as to what was going on within their Rhode Island wind energy area is because they had legislative language that protected their fishing industry. For the last 2 years, as a member of the East Hampton Town Fisheries Advisory Board, I have been begging, pleading, asking, requesting, you name it, in order to have similar language or rights put onto the project so that the commercial fishermen, both in state waters, when we're talking about the bubbies with traps, all the way out to the site, have some say of their grounds where they catch their fish. And that has not been adhered to whatsoever.
Can I ask you, Bonnie, that would have to be a state measure, or is it something that could be done at the local level?
The Department of State in New York is in charge of the the Coastal Zone Management Act for the state of New York. They put in a supplemental routine program changes just in September of 2017 that allowed offshore wind to be considered because of climate change, it was considered the same as a land-based initiative. And they took that as a routine change without any discussion. So if they're willing to do those kind of documents, there should and must be something to protect fishermen. Can I say one more thing? Super. Some of you may have read today in the paper, Orsted put a release that groups of fishermen that own inlet seafood have signed into an agreement for site plan analysis for the possibility of leasing a building and leasing a boat slip on site. That's possibly could be considered, and when it's submitted to BOEM, as a fisheries mitigation. However, there are 94 other commercial permits, federal permits in Montauk in addition to the state fishermen, and none of them have received any type of mitigation, not any type of science monitoring that should be at least 7 years from start to finish, no mitigation, no disruption packages, whether short-term or long-term, nothing. And those fishermen need that voice.
Okay, put a pin in that. We may come back to that. To your left is Dr. Francine Kershaw. She is the Marine Mammals Project Scientist for the Natural Resources Defense Council. Dr. Kershaw, what are the questions that you would like to see answered in terms of protecting marine species before this and subsequent wind farm developments when final approval? What are your primary concerns, if any, about the South Fork wind farm in particular? And do you think that climate change, in particular, the fact that climate change is fueled by non-renewable energy sources, poses a greater threat to the marine mammals than offshore development? And what are your feelings on large-scale offshore industrialization of the coast for wind power? That's a lot of questions.
It is. Thanks so much, Joe. Can you hear me? This is
He has the good one.
That'll be our talking stick.
It must be like
Here, I'll take-
electric or something.
We have a talking stick now.
Is that better? Is that a little better?
No. Can you hear me?
This is not that good either. I can try talking louder. I'm struggling with a head cold today, so I'll do my best. Yeah, thank you so much, Joe, and it's a real pleasure to be here. It's my first trip out to East Hampton, even though I've lived in New York for 10 years, which is kind of embarrassing. But it's a wonderful place. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, so I'll do my best to be brief. So I guess just to start by saying I work for the Natural Resources Defense Council. We're an environmental organization. We work on a whole range of environmental issues, but one of our priorities is fighting climate change. And one of the ways that we do that is by advocating and advancing environmentally responsible renewable energy solutions. And the key word there, the key part of that sentence is environmentally responsible. So, offshore wind can absolutely be developed in a way that's protective of our marine life. One of the things that NRDC is going to be looking closely at through every offshore wind project that comes through the permitting pipeline is for a really detailed environmental mitigation plan that will explain how a particular developer will take measures to avoid, minimize, and mitigate any potential environmental impacts to marine life. One of the things that we've been working on over the past year or so is a set of best management practices for developers to follow. It's to essentially guide the industry in ways that they can do that. We released the guide, it's called Harnessing the Wind, recently a few months ago, and a number of other environmental organizations are involved in that as well, and it was advised by a number of scientists. Zooming into South Fork in particular, again, we'll be looking at Orsted's plans in general to reduce any potential impacts to marine life. But in particular, from our perspective, the South Fork project area coincides with an important foraging and migratory area for the North Atlantic right whale. North Atlantic right whales are one of the most endangered whales, unfortunately, at this point on the planet. There's only about 400 individuals left. Fewer than 95 of those are breeding females, and they're really the lifeblood of the species that, will enable it to continue. They've been in severe decline since about 2010 for two main reasons. One of them is entanglement in fishing gear, and the other is vessel collisions, ship strikes. And, they're at a point where they can't really withstand any other additional stresses. So one of the things we'll be looking closely at in Orsted's plans and permit applications is a really detailed plan for how they'll minimize any potential impacts to right whales. Two key things in particular would be reducing levels of underwater noise that could, affect their behaviors like feeding or foraging or migratory patterns. And the other one would be to mitigate vessel strikes, which can cause, serious injury and possibly mortalities if there's a direct hit. coming to the broader issue of just climate change, in general, this is a big question. So there's no doubt that climate change is the greatest threat to marine life and marine mammals in the long term. You may have seen in the news yesterday a new report by the United Nations was released that really emphasized the amount of harm and how much strain that the ocean is already under and will be in the future from climate change impacts. And as I said earlier, we really believe that offshore wind power can be developed responsibly as long as these science-based best management practices are followed throughout the development pipeline. And kind of, I guess, linking that back to just the need to fight climate change, there's a real urgent need for us to tackle this problem. The impacts are going to be, devastating if we don't do something soon. And what this really needs is transformative change. We need to think big. And one of the things that we need to do in that context is really fully evaluate our, full clean energy portfolio options in front of us and do that at a scale that will really make a meaningful difference. So that's at the scale of landscapes or seascapes in this case. And we need to make sure that we're moving ahead with that at the scale that we really need to do. And I think the last point on industrialization of the ocean, the ocean is a busy place already. There's a lot of industrial activity already going on out there, be it shipping lanes or fishing, or there's a lot of cables already under the seabed. So it's not so much a matter of will this industrialize our ocean? It's more a matter of how can we manage our activities and our development activities in a way that really minimizes impacts to the marine environment. So we can have a win-win situation.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Sylvia Overby. She is Deputy Supervisor for East Hampton Town, and also a board member. She's here, by the way, I have to mention, for Peter Van Scoyoc, who is ill today, and she agreed to pinch hit for him, so we really appreciate that. Sylvia, East Hampton Town has generally been supportive of the South Fork Wind Farm project, especially in light of the large role it is expected to play in helping the town to achieve its goal, now expected to be delayed, of achieving 100% renewable energy by the year 2022. The wind farm has been in the works, at least on paper, for at least 5 years. Over that time period, have new or unanticipated concerns arisen on the part of the town that would temper its support for this or future wind farm projects?
So thank you, Joe. Can everyone hear me? And thank you to the Express News Group for having us and all of you for participating in this discussion today. I just want to clarify what our goal is for the town of East Hampton. So in 2013, it was a bipartisan board, and we said we would do 100% renewable by 2020 for electric consumption, and then by 2030, we would have an offset where we would have equivalent renewable energy for both transportation and heating. So there are two dates to consider, 2020, 2030. We understand that we are not going to probably meet that 2020 goal, which is too bad, but we are working towards it, and we have not changed our minds and had a resolution go forward to 2022. So we are still working diligently, although it's a short time frame. We understand that we're going to miss this, and so as we work towards our concerns with the wind farm, which is the biggest part of our portfolio in getting to the 100%, the town concerns have always been with the environment and with our fishing industry. And we believe that the Public Service Commission, with their Article 7, which is the same as our review of a SEQRA review, is going to further inform us as a town board and as a municipality about concerns that we have and concerns that may arise from the Public Service Commission's Article 7. So the resolve of the town board, though, is to continue to protect the environment and our fishing industry. It is very important to the community that we have and how many jobs it creates. And we believe that, but changing to renewables is going to be the answer to save both things, both of our community and our fishing industry. The science is clear on climate change, and the crisis is looming. And as Fred Thiele said, it's really already here. So I do want to say that the town board is, really, this isn't a town board decision to have a wind farm. It is driven by New York State. It's driven by the federal government as they do the leasing for the offshore wind sites. And I'm glad that Fred mentioned the Climate Leadership and the Community Protection Act. It was signed this year by the governor. And again, it's very supportive of where this community, whether the state, whether globally, we all need to be. And what the Community Protection Act really encourages is that everyone needs to be on board with climate change. Everyone. That starts with us individually, and it moves into, PSC or into LIPA and to PSE&G and to everyone and the municipalities. So we all need to be on board in understanding climate change and how we can make a difference.
Thank you, Sylvia. I feel compelled to point out, by the way, that we tried very hard to get a PSCG representative here on the panel today, and we're able to do so. Gordian Raacke is the executive director of Renewable Energy Long Island. I may just have to resort to the auctioneer's voice here. Renewable Energy Long Island. Gordian, we're talking about the aggressive goals that the towns have set to meet energy needs for the South Fork. You talked recently with the Group for Good Government about the prospect of using battery storage, solar, and conservation efforts to meet those energy goals. In terms of those energy sources versus wind power, do you consider this an either-or situation? Can you speak to the pros and cons of wind power versus those other renewable sources, at least the other non-fossil fuel sources? And can you speak about the relative costs of the various renewable energy options, sources?
That's a lot, but I'll try. So
briefly, 10 seconds.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of this, let me just say that last week was a big event all over the world called the Climate Strike. 4 million people marched in that strike globally. I happened to be in New York City for that. It was something that I'll never forget. And Greta Thunberg, the Swedish climate activist who started just about 1 year ago to go on climate strike to wake us up, is telling us that this generation, my generation, I think when I look around, I can say our generation, has failed the youth. She's pointing fingers at us, and she's pointing out that we have a responsibility to address climate change and address it in a timely manner. And she says, you failed us, but you can still fix it. There's a small window of opportunity now where we can still address this, fix this. As Sylvia Overby just said, we have to now act fast and quick and bold, and we have to all work together to make this happen. Otherwise, we're not going to make it. That goes for a village, for a town, for a city, for a nation, and for the world. So the battery storage solutions, and by the way, East Hampton Town is the first town and village, or the first on Long Island to have utility-scale battery storage. We have 2 facilities. Each one of them can power 5,000 homes for 8 hours by storing battery during off-peak times and then delivering that power during peak times or at any other time of the year. Battery storage is still a relatively high-priced item, but costs are going down. There are now incentives from the state of New York to install more battery storage, both utility scale and all the way down to residential scale. So you can now get an incentive if you want to install battery plus solar on your home, and it's a pretty rich incentive. It will expire at some point soon, I think, but it's still a costly option, just like solar was when we started, but it is available. You mentioned conservation, energy efficiency, I call it typically. The town runs a program offering free home energy audits to any homeowner in town, and that's actually available on the entire South Fork. I would encourage you, if you haven't gotten your energy audit, to sign up. You can do so on the Energize East Hampton website, and it's free of charge. And then you are finding out how much money and how much energy you're wasting every month. The average home on Long Island has the equivalent of a 3-by-3-foot hole in the wall, and you're trying to heat or cool that home, and therefore wasting a lot of energy and emitting a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So cost, to wrap up here, renewable resources have two cost items. One is the capital cost, what you need to invest when you put up the facility, whether it's your solar panels on your roof or a wind farm or a battery storage facility. And then they have no fuel cost, of course. That means they save you money going forward every minute, every day, every year that they run, and typically they run for 20, 30, and 40 years. But then there's another cost, and that's the cost of not going with energy efficiency and renewables. That's what the analysts call the externalities. It's the cost of, if we don't go with renewables and efficiency, we are causing damage to our environment, to our health, to our climate. And that comes with tremendous cost. And when we compare costs between one solution, let's say a renewable energy solution, and a conventional power solution, the status quo, we need to take both of those into account, because we pay for the non-action, for not switching to renewables. And now I would argue is the time to look at those costs as a whole and switch to the less expensive, to the better and much more appropriate resource, and that's efficiency in renewables.
Okay, thank you, Gordian. We're going to open the floor up to questions now. If I can get Virginia, if I can get you, I'll give you this microphone for the back of the room, and we'll try and tag team it with the first one. We are going to try and wrap this event up by 2 o'clock because I know everybody has to be somewhere. So who has questions? Anybody have something to start with? Yes.
It's a question for Bonnie Brady. How many Montauk fishing boats actually fish where the turbines will be?
Well, depending upon what kind of boat, I know that there are scallop boats that fish specifically within, just off of the Cox's Ledge area. There are pin hookers that hook fish, cod specifically. There are tows that are not directly on Cox's Ledge, but are within the wind energy area specifically, where they trawl there. The entire length of the cable, because if you look at the Block Island project, they said at the time that only 5% of the project, the transmission cables would not be dug to a depth so that trawlers would be able to work over it, and then they wound up putting 44 mats in areas where they did not dig. That whole extension cord that goes all the way down and through into either Wainscott or Montauk, multiple trawlers fish in those areas, specifically fixed gear guys also. So to be able to say specifically, you'd have to determine as to which permits they have. Ground fish, which is under catch shares because of the limited amount of quota that most of the Southern New England boats have within the New York area, they lease their quota. But did they, if you want to meet me afterwards, I have some stuff showing a block of different kinds of fisheries that occur within the area, specifically of the wind energy area.
Oh, I'm Jerry Mulligan. I'm just curious. There's so many cables that are already installed in the ocean. I was just curious about the area where the wind farm itself is, where the 15 turbines would be.
I believe as far as there's cables, there's telecommunication cables, but they're much smaller than the cables. And if you look at the Block Island project specifically, you've got two cables that are both exposed in at the beaches. They initially were slated to do long horizontal directional drilling for both, and then at the last minute they submitted in for short horizontal directional drilling so that on the Crescent Beach, that one is exposed. The problem for if you're a trawler, specifically for trawling, is if you are pulling your net and you get caught on the cable, you could lose your net or you could flip your boat. For fixed gear, there's issues regarding the science of electromagnetic frequency and how it affects the migratory patterns of fish and lobsters. There was work done by a Dr. King at URI that was just released this past year. And if you go on the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association Facebook page, you'll see information where he did not feel there was enough data and he would like to discuss it further prior to.
I want to give Jen a chance to answer. Some of these concerns have been voiced to Orsted since the beginning of the project. What has Orsted done to try and address these concerns?
Sure. This is very loud now, at least to me. With regard to the wind energy area, I mean, certainly, obviously the goal is coexistence between fishing and offshore wind. And so one of the concerns expressed was spacing between the turbines. And so our layout has changed based on input from fishermen. Initially we had tighter spacing, if you will. I mean, we talked originally about turbines that were roughly 0.8 miles apart. Now we're talking about turbines in a grid-like pattern that, along an east to west spacing is 1 nautical mile, and so those are examples of things we've even gone as far as asking BOEM to pause review of our permit applications while we collected more data and provided more information, so we could adjust that turbine layout. So I would also mention that Initially, we talked about a cable route that came over the north shore of the South Fork, and we abandoned that in favor of a landing on the south shore of the South Fork to be directly responsive to fishing as well. So those are two major changes, obviously. With regard to some of the the impacts that Bonnie was referenced. I mean, I will say that there are a lot of things out at sea on the seafloor. Obviously, there are existing cables, there are existing. You name it, parts of bridges that have been sunk, shipwrecks, just natural features. There are a lot of things out there. I can at least say that all of our infrastructure will be very clearly marked on the GPS systems that fishermen rely on as they navigate their way out at sea. So.
And Fred, if I can ask you, you've been sort of in between on this, and you mentioned in your opening answer that you have to look at this from all sides. You have to look at the impact on the commercial fishing industry and the benefits of a wind farm as far as the energy source. Are you seeing the conversations taking place in a satisfactory way? Do you think the fishing community is getting answers?
I think it could be better. I think it could be a lot better. I'll give you one example. Coming up, as Jen referred to, is this session where all the parties come together and try to work out their differences and talk to each other. And there's a lot of parties. This meeting's in Albany. I don't mind going to Albany, but this project is on the east end of Long Island. So I think that if you really want to have the parties together, you don't send them 250 miles to Albany to have a meeting. So Sylvia and I and Peter haven't talked about the issue, but I was going to reach out to Peter today, but I'll do it with Sylvia. I mean, we need to be demanding that this meeting be on the east end of Long Island. So, it may be an old-fashioned and quaint notion that we can somehow reach consensus on this, and obviously there are strong feelings and differences of opinion. But it's one thing to say, well, we have a process to bring people together. To me, that's not an open process if you make people get in the car, and I know this trip really well, and drive across the Throgs Neck Bridge and up the thruway to have this meeting. So I think it needs to be a more interactive process, and I think we as elected officials need to ensure that the process is that way. So that's one example anyway.
Okay, any questions? Yeah, let me start close here.
Thanks. My name's Katie Casey. I concur. I think everyone in the room concurs that immediate action is required to get off, fossil fuels and to work toward renewables. But a project this important, I think, deserves some very long-range view and thinking. I guess this question is probably for Jen. In terms of the life of the equipment, replacement, maintenance, Does the footing stay there indefinitely and the turbines are replaced? Can you give me a little information about the life going forward?
Sure. So the turbines have an engineered design life of 25 years. And we also have there's terms in our lease as well that we have to abide by. So the way it's written right now is that this is these are installations that would have a 25-year life, and then we actually have to develop a decommissioning plan at a later stage of our permitting, the permitting process. And so we have to describe how we would decommission the whole project, and we also have to provide funds for it. So as soon as you are about to begin construction, you actually have to put up those funds in an escrow account. And every few years they'll relook at the plan and say, okay, the costs change, and if they've changed, you have to put up more money. So, so that's the process that's in place now. I mean, in Europe, they have they have been able to replace, an existing turbine or foundation rather with a new turbine. It's called repowering. That's not the way the lease is written right now, but 25 years is a long way away. But those are at least that's the system that's in place now, at least in U.S. federal waters. And so we'll have to see, how when we get to when the time comes. I mean, there's only a few wind farms at this point that have been decommissioned globally, but they certainly accounted for the fact that you have to have a decommissioning plan. You have to be able to pay for it, and there will obviously be some kind of environmental assessment with that, as the time approaches.
Bonnie, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention regarding when Jen was saying how they voluntarily decided to add more information regarding the project. What actually occurred was the Coastal Resource Management Council was going to deny consistency to the project because they had not done, there's about 8 or 10 pages on the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association Facebook page. But what they specifically said, Grover Fugate said that in a letter that was done, I believe, in February of this past year, that he was requesting Deepwater Wind to provide following data and information within 30 days from the date of this letter to demonstrate that the South Fork Wind Farm, South Fork Electric Cable Project is consistent with the enforceable policies of the Ocean SAMP. Absent this information, within the CRMC's review period, presently scheduled to end on April 22nd, the CRMC would be unable to conclude that the South Fork Wind Farm, South Fork Electrical Cable Project is consistent with the Rhode Island Coastal Management Program. Thus, the CMRC would have to object to the Deepwater's consistency certification. So it wasn't just because they decided that they wanted to add some info. It was because if they did not provide that data to them, that they would not get consistency. Without consistency, the project would not go forward. And New York does not have any type of language. Now, specifically, I believe you asked me this before, is it the state that's involved? And I'm not sure, maybe Sylvia can answer this. The town, as part of their condition of their the community package, they never even spoke to the Fisheries Advisory Board. It seems to me that if the town is allowing them access onto town land, they could put the exact same specifics into a type of environment. Maybe Sylvia can tell me one way or not if that's not possible.
So right now the town is looking at easements that may be required and may not be required. We don't know the answer yet. We don't know where the cable is going to come in. It's either going to come in at Hither Hills, which is state-owned land, and go down a state highway to Cove Hollow Road, or it's going to come in at Wainscott. At the Wainscott Beach is where we do own the roads, and they would have to have easements over those roads in order to bring the cable through. In that area, we're looking at things that would be called betterments, things that would help the community. In that package deal, there are language, and I haven't seen it lately. It continues to change as we work with the trustees as well on some of the language, and they have their own attorney. We have our attorney that's working on this. The language is looking at things like burying all the lines for everyone, so they would have better resiliency along Beach Lane, and which we think is a plus for anyone that lives along Beach Lane. The other issues are going to be things that would support the fishing industry, because that's where I think the biggest amount of money goes as far as a consultant for them. We're also looking at, bringing in experts so that they have an answer to some of their questions, and the town has an answer to the questions as well as what Bonnie is asking about.
Okay. I want to give Jen just a real quick chance to answer. Keep it brief. brief, please.
Sure. I was just going to respond to some of the characterization of, our desire to provide more information. I mean, I know Bonnie referenced the letter. I'll just say that I would characterize it differently. I think that Rhode Island is saying they need more time, they need more information, which is, there's a lot of permitting speak, and we have more information to provide, and we'll do that. But I did want to just nod to the fact that, we've really tried to listen to the fishing concerns and been responsive to adjustments in that in spacing. I mean, that is still an evolving conversation. Rhode Island doesn't have, there are no hard and fast rules about how the distances of turbine spacing, and that's still something that the industry is grappling with. The Coast Guard is a big part of that conversation as well. But I just want to underscore the fact that we are trying to be responsive here, and that's how it was intended.
Okay, thanks. Virginia?
Hi, my name is Michael Hansen. I live in Waynescott. If every impact study, environmental study is completed to a satisfactory level, T's are crossed, I's are dotted, will you support a cable landing at Waynescott Beach? And if not, why not?
Who are you directing the question to, Mike?
Mr. Thiele, let's start there.
Well, that decision, I guess, for Waynescott will be made by the town, not by the state. I have to tell you that overall, though, the process by which trying to find a transmission, a place where the cable comes ashore, would be another complaint I have had about this process. It seems to be more driven by finding the path of least political resistance than trying to find objectively, based on environmental and other factors, where it should be located. So, the answer to your question, you're asking me to prejudge what the process is going to show versus the options. But I found this process to be very divisive in the community by basically, again, trying to find the path of least political resistance instead of trying to come up with a location that is, the best, if there is one, based on the merits. So I'm not going to prejudge it because I don't know we're in the middle of this process, not at the end of it. And as I said at the outset, I see myself as being the umpire here and not as being a cheerleader for one side or the other. So it's the middle of the game. It's not the end of the game.
I'm going to let Sylvia answer this too. I do want to say that the question about where the cable is coming ashore and whether it's Montauk or Waynescott is probably worth a press session all by itself. And at the risk of bogging down the conversation, I say that in all sincerity. I think that's probably another topic that we deserve to spend a little time and energy on, maybe in early 2020, but I think that'll still be time, right? I think the decision won't be made by then. But I don't want to discourage the conversation, and we'll let Sylvia answer the question, but I'd like to sort of keep the focus on environmental stuff. Sylvia.
Yeah, it's not a decision that the town is going to make only when the best route is selected, and we don't know what that best route is. As Jen has said, they originally were looking at coming in on the north part of Long Island, and that was not done because of meetings with the fishermen at that time. So the two locations, which they must have a preferred location and a secondary location, they have done that, and their preferred location appears to be Waynescott. Their secondary location is going to be Hither Hills. So the only play that the town has is whether or not they decide on Waynescott, and if we allow them to have easements, we are looking at whether or not, how those easements would affect the community. And we're still in the process of that. We aren't making a decision on the easements until we know what the Public Service Commission is going to say. And when the Public Service Commission says that the Article 7 has been reviewed appropriately, and we have time to look at that, and we are able, with our own experts, able to look at it, then we'll be able to make a better decision.
I'm Ed Braun from Montauk, and my question really is to, I guess, a combination of Fred Thiele and perhaps Sylvia and maybe Gordon Raacke. After 2 or 3 years of listening to these conversations, we've progressed to a point where you hear a voice from the community that says, if done responsibly, climate change has brought us, and the need for clean energy have brought us to a community feeling that that wind power and the fishing community and environmentalists likely can coexist because the issues are that important. And so my question to the group of you is, what can we do to help you form collaborative discussions that Fred is outlining that shouldn't be done in Schenectady or Potsdam, New York, but need to be on the East End, so somewhere. It doesn't have to be Montauk or East Hampton, but somewhere on the South Fork. What can we do with you to create a collaborative discussion that addresses directly how do we mitigate these problems? The fishermen have real needs, the environmentalists have needs, we have needs for clean energy, we have real needs to avoid more climate change degradation, and it's time for us to sit at the same table and discuss what those needs are and answer some questions that we've been asking each other for 2 or 3 years. Costs and how do you integrate to the grid and how do you share power are more tactical problems. But if we get the right people around the table and act collaboratively and make the discussion more inclusive, I think we can help drive an integration of all these needs.
Well, I think there are probably 2 parts to that question, and one is there's a legal process. It's been referred to. There's an Article 7 process, and those that are parties to this, and a lot of people are, that will provide one mechanism. That's a little bit formal mechanism, but I certainly, as a state official and with our town officials, if there's more that we can do collectively, informally, to bring the various stakeholders together, whether it be the fishing industry or Wayne Scott or Montauk or the various issues that come up with this, I'm certainly willing to participate in that kind of process. And these are issues that should get decided here locally and shouldn't get decided in Albany. And I agree that I think there is the possibility of reaching a consensus on this. I'm not sure what it is yet, but it's important that we at least make the effort. So I would think formally through that Article 7 process. There's a federal process too. If they're having the state process in Albany, I can only imagine where the federal stuff is going to happen. But I think we can help to facilitate that locally, and that as local officials is something we should be doing.
But without making it too legal initially.
It does, yeah.
I think a consensus, the right people sitting together at a table representing all the stakeholders,
right,
expressing their conceptual, strategic belief that this has to be done.
Agreed.
Would help drive the politicians to please bring us to that solution.
Actually, I'm going to go to Gordian in a second here, but I want to kind of piggyback on that point because, Bonnie, that's actually, when I was thinking about coming to the session today, it's one of the questions I wanted to ask, and we sort of touched on it in the initial question. But let me just ask you, is there a point at which you can see yourself signing off and saying, protections are in place, I'm satisfied to the point where I think this project is something I can support. I'm not satisfied necessarily, but we've reached a compromise that I think can be done. Is that a possibility on your end?
Hold on 1 second, thank you. If you're going to read, I will read excerpts. We've had these discussions before, Ed. The Rhode Island process took 2 years. They threw a bunch of money into it. They did all kinds of scientific surveys as a beginning. They also took 2 years to create a fisheries advisory council. They went all through the state, interviewed fishermen, found out who fished where, how, when, where. That included commercial. It included charter guys. That was the other part. There was a lot of charter headboats in that area, and also the recreational fishermen. After they did that, they started on a process where they did a series of studies. I want to say for the Block Island project, I think it was 3 years followed by maybe 1 and 1. But the time involved, the key is to do no harm. And that's what's being left out of this process. Pile driving the ocean floor is not a benign process. That's 220 decibels of sound. You've got particle wave pressure. you were talking about the right whale even on the survey boats, and I've got to get some notes here. The North Atlantic right whale here is between 11 hertz and 23 kilohertz. As a result of that, there are both surveys with the chirper, profilers, boomers, and sparkers, that if the whales are not in the spot initially, they have a slow ramp-up process. I don't know if they have the same ramp-up process for the surveys. You could wind up deafening or hurting the hearing of these whales. So if the whale can't hear, they can't vocalize. They can't hear that ship. So then when they hit that ship, that's a problem. When you're talking about for the pile driving, if they're right under it, that's a huge problem. And that's a zone of about 500 meters, I believe, that they go. Then you go to jet plowing. Jet plowing at the site is also 220 decibels. If you're a low-frequency whale, including minke whales, or if you're a fish with a swim bladder for pile driving, you're out of there. If you don't have a swim bladder, you can wind up like squid, you can wind up just with lesions and then swim off and die. We have to find out where these issues, we've got to get enough testing to determine that when we do this, we don't destroy, in this case, Cox's Ledge, which is one of the most pristine cod grounds that exist.
I'm going to come back to
Yes, thank you, sorry.
Gordian. I'm going to let Gordian have a chance, but I do want to come back to you, Francine, because I want to talk specifically about that. Oh, all right. I wanted to talk about some of the things you mentioned about the impact on right whales. Okay. The impact on right whales. What other species do we need to worry? What do we need to worry about with right whales, and what are some other species we need to be concerned about?
So as I mentioned before, the the main, and as Bonnie Riley said, underwater noise is a potential impact to right whales and other marine life as well. Ship strikes also. The good thing is that there's solutions for these potential impacts available right now, and many developers are using them, are expecting to use them through their site characterization process, but also then planning to do so during construction. One example, one kind of solid example is Vineyard Wind, that has their first commercial scale project is based in the Massachusetts wind energy area. They signed an agreement with NRDC, National Wildlife Federation, and the Conservation Law Foundation earlier this year, and agreed to incorporate a number of the science-based best management practices I talked about earlier into their construction and operations plan. So, for example, things that they will be doing is not pile driving at times of year where right whales are present at their highest densities. So there's an avoidance strategy there off the bat. They'll also be using a number of noise reduction technologies that are available right now. You can use certain hammer types. You can use things like bubble curtains around the pile driving site, which the noise is loud, but the bubbles then dissipate the noise relatively quickly. There are some other technological solutions as well that do that. They'll be reducing their vessel speeds at critical times of year for right whales. So there are potential impacts that we should be thinking about, but there are tangible ways that we can reduce those impacts right now. We strongly believe that based on that, we can advance offshore wind by, following those best practices.
Okay, let me get some other voices into the conversation.
I hope you can hear this. I'm Linda James. I am chair of the town-appointed Energy Sustainability Committee. On Friday, I stood on the other side of the fence and listened to a group of activists that I don't see represented at the tables here. Our kids. To me, our kids are the greatest resource we have in this community, and it is time for us to listen to them too, to bring them into this discussion. And what was the dialogue that they wanted in those few minutes that they stood outside of the high school and addressed us and engaged us in a dialogue? They want action. And what else? Who else wants action? 4 million young people who's going to be the beneficiaries of this planet that we are slicing up into who gets what, including the fishing community. They are one element in the grand scheme of extinction that is going on, that is being brought by climate change. So I want to thank my colleague Gordian Raacke for actually walking with this group, and I want to thank the high school students who are now ready to participate in this discussion, and I think it's time we listen to them. Thank you.
Gordian, what did you hear yesterday when you were part of the...
What did I hear at the climate strike? I heard loud and clear that we better get our act together and that we do this very quickly and commensurate in scale to the problem. Little stuff is good when we can take personal action at home, and I do that, and all of us, I suspect, do that. But we will not solve the climate emergency with just individual action. We need to think much bigger and much faster now. I wanted to just, first of all, I want to say I really appreciated what Francine and Bonnie just said. Do no harm is a principle that, as an environmentalist, I think we all support. But we also got to look at the big picture. The status quo, business as usual, does a lot of harm. So when we use electricity today, right here, we are responsible for burning fossil fuels, removing entire mountaintops in Appalachia, destroying entire ecosystems in Canada when we prospect for gas, destroying our climate, harming our health. So do no harm is a very important principle. We got to heed it, but we got to not just talk the talk, we have to do it. I wanted to also zoom out from the debate about the South Fork wind farm to what's happening in the state. The Assemblyman already mentioned the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. He talked about community protection. I want to spend a minute filling everyone in on the climate leadership part. New York now is the leading state in the nation when it comes to climate legislation, potentially the world. New York has set very aggressive goals, very similar to the goals that our town board set. So by 2030, just 10 years from now essentially, 70% of our electricity, the majority of our electricity, has to come from renewable resources. By 2040, all of that has to be clean energy. And by 2050, our carbon emissions have to be zero from all sectors of the economy, not just electricity, but transportation sector, industrial sectors, chemical sectors, everything. So New York is now set and has adopted a law, and thank you, Assemblyman, for being part of making that happen, to act big and bold and fast. And we need to see the discussion here about a local project or a cable landing or what have you as part of the bigger picture.
Did you say you have?
Yes, hi. My name's Daniel Farnham. I'm a commercial fisherman from Montauk, New York. We all like to say how we're for green energy and renewable energy, and as myself, I'm an individual who is most impacted by climate change. Moving fish populations, warming oceans, we are affected by that. And I'd like to speak on what Assemblyman Thiele said. Everyone's looking for the most politically expedient way to deal with it, and that seems to have been to just say we'll just build more and more wind turbines offshore, to the point where we're speaking of 15 turbines happening here now, but we're looking at thousands of turbines going up in our fishing areas. And so people don't want, they want green energy, but they don't have to look at a land-based wind turbine or see solar panels. The state just scuttled this past year what was going to be a large-scale solar farm at what was the Shoreham nuclear power plant, and said, oh, we'll just build more turbines offshore instead. And yes, I'd like to do something about climate change. I'm all for that. But it seems everyone who has now forced my industry almost out of business with climate change is now saying, oh, well, you can also risk your life by having to drive around a veritable forest of turbines offshore. And I'd just like to see other people actually step up and make a sacrifice for green energy. Why are we scuttling large solar farms on our island? Why aren't we seeing land-based turbines go up? I mean, yes, offshore wind can be part of it, but it is not the whole solution for our problem. And why is this the route we're going and just throwing it down our throats?
Can you also take a second here, because I would love to hear from you. What are your major concerns as far as how this will impact you as a commercial fisherman? You talked about the navigating through a forest of turbines. What are some other concerns that you have specifically? What are you worried the impact will be?
Loss of life, basically.
You mean your life?
My life, yes.
Why would that be? Explain.
When you are driving through or trying to navigate through a wind turbine array, your radar is ineffective. There's too much electromagnetic interference, so you're driving just visually based at that point. There was just a collision in the UK with one of their own maintenance vessels collided into a turbine because the lights were out on that turbine. Luckily, there was no loss of life there, but that is an experienced boat used to working in that array that collided with it. The ocean's a dangerous place. Everyone pictures it as just, a flat, calm day with turbines out there. No, we work out there year-round, winter, when it's blowing 60 miles an hour and you have 20-foot seas. Now imagine trying to navigate through several hundred turbines, and you have to make the choice of either trying to weave your way through there or go hundreds of miles around out of your way when you could have a hurricane bearing down on you. And so it's either you take an extra 12 hours to go around and have the storm hit you, or you risk it and try and go through a wind turbine array. And we've been trying to work with a group, RODA, Responsible Offshore Development Association, and the wind companies, but there's been a lot of pushback on transit lanes and so that we can safely navigate through these arrays has been a big issue for us, and spacing of the turbines so that we could maybe possibly navigate through there. But we know that once these arrays go up, we effectively will not be able to fish in there. Everyone likes to say that we will legally be allowed to fish in there, in the area, and yes, there will be no laws against it, but we're scared that our insurance companies will prohibit us from doing so if we want to have insurance, and just for safety reasons, we will not be able to fish in there.
I have one really stupid question, which I'm going to ask because I just feel like it needs to be asked. So why not just fish elsewhere? Why is that piece of the ocean just not off limits? Why not just find another spot? That's a dumb question, and I'm aware of that, but I want to hear the answer.
Well, we need to go where the fish are, so we follow them, obviously, but we're not just looking at a small area. The Rhode Island, Massachusetts wind energy area is larger than the state of Rhode Island. We are currently seeing more lease areas that are going to go up south of Long Island, all the way to Jersey. I mean, these are thousands and thousands of square miles that are being used. And there is a limited amount of area because we need to follow what is the continental shelf. And there's only so many square miles of that. So as it gets increasingly filled up, you're displacing effort out of those what were traditional fishing grounds and then piling more vessels on top of each other in the remaining areas, which once again makes it for a more dangerous situation.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for the contribution. The second question I have, I'll actually direct to you, Bonnie. Don't we have some experience with this, though, with the Rhode Island wind farm? And anecdotally, I've heard that some of the fishermen there have actually seen benefits to the wind farm being installed. Can you talk about that?
I can. I just want to add on to what Dan was talking about. There's over 347 different spatial regulations put on the fishermen by the federal government telling us when and where we can fish and how. And by putting, Dan talks about the Rhode Island, Massachusetts wind energy areas being bigger than the state of Rhode Island. It's also 3/4 of the size of the Grand Canyon National Park. At every 7/10 of a mile, strap a windmill in on some of the most vibrant fishing grounds. They do have tails and we follow them, but fish only go to certain areas. If you know about fish biology, based on a certain temperature, 1/4 degree of a difference, they go offshore in the winter, then they come back onshore in the summer, and obviously people catch and fish. They don't just go everywhere. And as a result, there's only certain areas based on permits and history and 1,000 other permutations that where we can go to fish. Now, to your question about, and I forgot it.
It was about, the question was, yes.
Right. Well, the problem with the part of the Rhode Island farm is, there's only 5, and they're very small. And also, a lot of people talk about the wind farm as, it's 30 megawatts or 100 megawatts. That's only nameplate. an actual wind farm, what it produces yearly is about 36% of what the nameplate is. So for a 100 megawatt project, you only get 36 megawatts out of it, which is a huge difference. For the Rhode Island project, they're very small. They put them in an area where I know that black sea bass, who basically are kind of like the little rats of the sea, they'll go anywhere there's structure. There's been a fair amount of biofouling, which is when alternate structures grow when you put steel in the water. A lot of mussels growth. In Horns Rev, they had a huge issue where it was like an exponentially large section of mussels existed. In certain areas, if they put them where there isn't enough water flow, you can actually wind up corrupting that area depending on how much is growing. For also Block Island, and the thing I didn't mention when you're talking about electromagnetic frequency, the cod don't seem to really be there anymore, because what studies do exist show that electromagnetic frequency attracts sharks and rays, elasma branches, and it repels cod. And we don't even have any studies of the kind or size for the amount of, what are we talking, 200,000 volts, 2 cables coming in. We have stuff with little cables from, they do it in Europe in 2 and 3 megawatt doses. We have nothing that comes at the level of what they're putting in, and we have no long-term studies because people are afraid it's going to wind up the fish. They follow migrations. Magnetic impulses have something to do with it. If we put too much power going on, not like a little simple telecommunication cable, but a big power cable, that may react like an electric dog fence and keep the fish from following through on their migrations.
Science fairly accurate on that? I just want to give you a chance to...
Yeah, and as a marine mammal scientist, I'm not a fish biologist. That's not my area of expertise, but I will take the opportunity while I have the mic just to add on to something that I was saying earlier, because Gordian sparked a thought that I had when you were talking about how New York is a real leader in this context, and New York's also leading the way on developing best management practices for wildlife, and you asked me, Joe, about other species as well. So New York is set up for what they're calling technical working groups. There's an environmental technical working group, a fisheries technical working group, which do you sit?
I know Carl, and we've been talking.
Great. So I sit on the environmental one. There's one for maritime, and then a job supply. So the environmental technical working group is charged. It's a stakeholder group of NGOs and developers, and we're charged together to develop best management practices for many different species, so marine mammals, sea turtles, birds, and bats. And that work's going to continue. It's already started for about the last year, and it's going to continue for perpetuity into the future. So we have solutions right now, but then as new information comes in and is available, we can develop, we can continue to improve the practices that we have for other species as well. And then the other exciting thing that New York just did, in addition to awarding the contract to Orsted, was awarding a contract to Equinor, who have selected to use gravity-based foundations. So instead of pile driving, gravity-based foundations are essentially a large concrete block that they sink, and do so by producing virtually no noise. There's some still very low levels just from the installation, but that's essentially removing one of the main potential stresses of development. So, as from the environmental community's perspective, that's really exciting, and we're hoping that other developers will, follow suit in the future. So thank you.
I just wanted to go back to Ed Braun's question earlier, which was, we've been talking about this for a while now. How can we now move this forward? And one thing I keep noticing, and I just did earlier here, is that there's still a lot of misconceptions and half-truths, and there are really good sources of information, and I would encourage everyone to check them out. NYSERDA, for example, in its offshore wind master plan, did, over the course of 2 years, collect a tremendous amount of data and compile 20 studies, I think it was, that you can read through if you are so inclined. NYSERDA has all sorts of handy fact sheets on their website on offshore wind, on battery storage, on solar, on anything and everything related to energy. What's great is that we are today, as citizens, getting involved in these energy choices, right? So we're sitting here discussing very technical and sort of policy issues and all of that, which is wonderful, I think, because I've been doing this for 26 years now, and there was nobody in the room for some time. But I think this is wonderful, right? But we got to also make sure we understand the facts and do our homework before we make statements that are not necessarily ill-willed, but that are just based on not having the right information at your fingertips. So go to NYSERDA and look for the information you're looking for. One more thing Dan Farnham asked about, why is it just offshore wind? Why not solar? Great question. In energy and the battery storage question earlier, the same way, there's not a single silver bullet. You just need a broadly diversified energy portfolio for a number of reasons, and everybody in energy knows that, and in the state at NYSERDA knows that. So NYSERDA's and the state's goal of 9,000 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035 is a part of the solution. It's exactly 30% of what we need to do to reach our energy goals by 2030, 2040, and 2050, right? So we need to do a lot of solar. In fact, the state goal right now is 6,000 megawatts of solar, 3,000 megawatts of battery storage, 9,000 megawatts of wind, and so forth. And they're working very hard to make that happen. Solar is a great technology because it's distributed. It is available during the day, not at night. Wind is a great resource because it is available at night many times, and has a much larger potential. We have, some have said, the Saudi Arabia of wind right here off of our shores. It'll play a big role on Long Island and in the state of New York, but it's not the only source.
Francine, you said you were saying.
Sorry, just super quick. Yeah, in terms of materials, if you'd like more information, so the best management practice harnessing the wind guide I mentioned earlier that covers all species, that's available online. We also issued specific right well BMPs. They're available online. And the very detailed agreement that we signed with Vineyard Wind that outlines every specific thing that they'll do is also available online. So if you would like to get links to those, please come and see me afterwards. I can hang around for a little while, and I'll be happy to send them to you.
Very briefly, Bonnie, also, the Public Service Commission made a fisheries mitigation plan part of the package for the 2.4 and then the 9 gigawatts of wind that's supposed to take place offshore. So for any of the future projects that come that are a Sunrise or any of those, a fisheries mitigation plan are submitted for NYSERDA to, I believe, decide. The problem is the South Fork Wind Farm has no such plan and was cited prior to any of this. Regarding any other, also because of information, if you all go to the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association Facebook page, you can find hundreds of documents bringing you to information. You can contact me and I can send you any links to many, many studies that I have, and specifically regarding electromagnetic frequency. And Dr. Andrew Gill, who's from Australia, he was the one that did a recent study with John W. King on electromagnetic frequency. They presented at the NYSERDA Science Forum this past April in Port Jefferson, and if anyone needs any information to speak to them directly about that study, I'd be glad to give it to them.
I'll tell you what, after we're done, I'll talk with each panel member and we can share contact information for anybody that's interested in doing that on our Facebook page at 27 East. Fred, do you guys want to say something briefly?
I know it was meant well, but I'm not sure I want to be the Saudi Arabia of anything. But I just wanted to make a point here also. NYSERDA has been mentioned a lot, and I just want to, there is 2 more projects coming. They're being, the contracts are being done through NYSERDA. My experience with dealing with NYSERDA through the procurement process and then following the procurement process, incredibly professional. I think are trying to do all the right things, and it was kind of indirectly referred to here. This project is through the Long Island Power Authority, and I can't say as much about the Long Island Power Authority. I just have to say that NYSERDA has promised to release in total the power purchase contracts in totality. LIPA still hasn't done that. And some of these other things that are being done through NYSERDA, LIPA is not doing, and I think that that has helped to contribute to a more difficult climate with trying to get this particular project completed and moved forward. So, there's still time if anybody's out there from LIPA who couldn't come today because apparently they don't have enough employees to spare one.
I think this will be our last question.
Okay. My name is David Gruber. I am a party to the PSC Article 7 proceeding, and I will make it to Albany on October 8th if necessary. If I can get a ride with you, Fred, that would be great. I was glad to hear Gordian mention NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, because that is the agency that manages all of this procurement for the entire state of New York, with the odd and inexplicable exception of LIPA. And I attended the NYSERDA forum last week at Southampton High School. The best thing about it was that you got to talk directly to representatives of NYSERDA. I learned some astonishing things that evening. One of them is that the official position of NYSERDA is that the Deepwater wind field is inappropriate for development as a wind farm because of resource conflicts, specifically with fishing, and that NYSERDA has communicated that to BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the federal agency. I'm in the process of trying to make sure that's not just some rogue fishing guy at NYSERDA who said that, and that that's actually correct. But I assume that he knew what he was talking about. If that's the case, I'm curious as to why none of the advocates for this particular project, that represents a mere 1.5% of New York State's wind energy goal, are either unaware of this fact or indifferent to it.
All right, I'm going to let Jen answer that, I think.
I mean, I think it's a bold statement to speak on behalf of NYSERDA, and I think you should take that to them directly. But I would be very surprised if that was how they characterized our site. So, but I'll allow that to be a follow-up question for the press.
And we will. We'll look into that. Okay. Want to thank everybody. We're getting close to 2 o'clock here, so I'll turn it back over to the publisher, Gavin Manu. Thank you very much for coming out today for this. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to Rowdy Hall. Thank you to LTV. And thank you to our sponsors, Raacke Carrero Wealth Partners, Advantage Title, and Adam Miller Group. You're why we are able to do this, and we love doing it. So this is the first of many conversations we're going to have on this topic and on many others. I hope you will join me in a round of applause for the panel that came together to have the conversation.
Thank you very much. Just briefly, we are doing these events in Southampton and Sag Harbor, but we're going to be back here at Rowdy Hall on October 24th. I was sitting with Katie Casey, so we're going to be talking about affordable housing, which comes up in seemingly every conversation. I'm surprised it didn't somehow come up today. But affordable housing October 24th, and then on November 21st, we're going to talk about the village that we're sitting in right now. I was talking to Mark Smith on the way in, and he was lamenting the slowdown that we're seeing. We want to talk about ways to bring vitality back to East Hampton Village, sewer districts, live music. We've got some elected officials in the town here today, but we want to engage the village as well, and we want to explore that topic about how we can make this a real year-round destination and even bring the local community into East Hampton Village. So thank you very much. Again, thanks to our sponsors for coming, and we appreciate everything. Have a good day.